please use the chat feature to indicate when you want to ask questions or make a comment. We should be well used to this now. When we're voting for items 5, 6, 7 and 9 on the agenda, this will be done by exception. This is to speed things up. Now, if you do want to vote against the recommendation, please let me know as soon as possible, and we will revert to a full roll call on that item. Now, for the budget and alternative voting, that will be done by the roll call. Okay. Now, I've got to wait now for confirmation that we're streaming live. It's been confirmed that we're streaming live, so anyone who is watching this from their own living rooms or the offices, the lights have just gone out on me. Okay. Whilst we're trying to sort our side out, I'll ask the Imam Mirizam to do the prayers, please, for the Mayor's Chaplain. Okay. Mirizam. Can you all see me now?
I can, Billy. Sorry, I've had internet connections.
It was your fault, was it, Alan? We all went in the dark. Okay.
Oh, right. Well, I hope not. I've had all sorts of problems. Right. I'll mute.
Right, we're going to move on. We're going to start with the civic prayers. Good evening. Could I ask Imam Mirizam to lead us in prayers, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Respected councillors. We begin in the name of God Almighty, the most merciful, the most forgiving. God Almighty, bless us in this month of spring. Bless us in these times that are ahead of us. We seek your help to overcome the difficulties of this life. We seek your prayer. We seek prayer for those who are struggling at this time in this borough of Rochdale. God Almighty, help us to assist one another, to better each other's life, health, prosperity, and mental health well-being. Guide us to the best of practices and guide us to that which you love, and keep us away from that which you abhor and that which you detest. Allahumma ameen. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidun Majid. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ameen.
Thank you. Can I ask Father Michael now to say a few prayers for us?
Almighty God, as we gather together for the betterment of all the people of Rochdale, we remember, especially at this time, all those affected by the current pandemic, those who have lost loved ones, those who are sick, and those in our NHS who work so tirelessly to keep us safe. We also remember all the officers of the Borough of Rochdale for their tireless works, and we ask you to bless all their endeavours in the coming year. Amen.
Thank you, Father. Still in the dark. Before we begin the meeting, I'm going to invite Councillor Neil Emmett to address the council. Councillor Neil Emmett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to offer Donna Bowler and Mark Widdop my most sincere apologies for my behaviour at a seminar held at Nye Bevan House regarding income generation in June 2019. Although it's regretful that this complaint has dragged on for so long, I do want Donna and Mark to know that I recognise my actions were hurtful and upsetting. I recognise that sometimes I can get frustrated and upset and tend to sometimes engage my mouth before my brain, and this sometimes results in me offending people. This is what happened at that seminar back in June 2019, and for that I'm truly sorry. Since this incident, we have enjoyed a very productive relationship, and in my opinion, we have work better together than we've ever worked previously. And in a number of cases, I've been extremely impressed with the work Donna and Mark have produced. Finally, I want to provide Donna and Mark with an assurance that this type of behaviour will not happen again in any forum, and I look forward to continuing to work with both of them in a constructive and positive way going forward. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Emmett. Much appreciated. I'm now going to formally open the meeting with a roll call of all the members present. Will you please speak up clearly so that I can mark you off on the roll call sheet? Okay. Councillor Ali Ahmed.
Can you hear me, Mr. Mayor? I'm here.
I can now. Councillor Iftikhar Ahmed.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Shakil Ahmed.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Delat Ali.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sultan Ali.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bamford. Councillor David Bamford. Are you muted? See.
Apparently he's struggling to get in, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Tom Besford.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor John Blundell.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Malcolm Boris.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Alan Brett.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Philip Burke.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wendy Cox.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Patricia Dale.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Ashley Durnley.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Raymond Dutton.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Neil Emmett.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Susan Emmett.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Janet Emsley.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor James Gartside.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. I'm present.
Councillor John Arkley.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. I'm also present.
Councillor Kieran Eakin.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Michael Holly.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Aftab Hussain.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Andy Kelly.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Peter Malcolm.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Donna Martin.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rachel Massey.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Daniel Meredith.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Amna Mia.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kath Nixon. Kathleen Nixon.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Callum Nolan.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sean O'Neill.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Liam O'Rourke.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rena Palucci.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Faisal Reina.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Asim Rashid.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sarah Robotham.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Peter Rush.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Susan Smith.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Angela Smith.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Patricia Sullivan.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor John Taylor.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Carol Wardle.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Jane Warren.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Shah Wazir.
Not here.
Chair, you've missed Councillor West.
Councillor Shah Wazir. Councillor June West.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Donna Williams.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Peter Williams.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Peter Winkler.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Elsie Waith.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Samina Zahir.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Mohammed Zaman.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. I'm here.
Thank you very much. That's the roll call.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Bamford, I will let him.
I'm sorry I didn't get that. Could you just repeat that?
Yeah, it's Councillor Bamford. I will let him. Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any apologies for absence? I've received apologies from Councillor Beswick, Farnell, Almby, Johnson, McCarthy and Robinson. Are there any other apologies I don't know about?
Mr. Mayor, is Councillor Davidson in attendance?
She sent her apologies in.
Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you.
She said that's just before this meeting. I haven't written her name down. Thank you, Andy. She has sent her apologies in.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Item number 2 on the agenda is the declaration of interest. Now, do any members have any personal, prejudicial or disclosable pecuniary interests that they need to declare at this meeting? Now, can I ask any members with interest to now declare them by indicating in the chat or by raising your hand for me to see? No one's any. Everyone's all right with that? Okay. Item 3 is the Mayor's communications, and I have none. Item number 4 are public questions and petitions, and no questions have been received for this evening's meeting. So we're moving on to item 5. Now, this is discretionary fees and charges. Now, for each of these items, Councillor Brett, will you move the recommendations? And Councillor Wardle, will you second the motion? And Councillor Wardle, you may reserve your right to speak. Councillor Brett.
Formally move, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Wardle.
Formally second and reserve my right to speak, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And no questions or remarks have been received. And does any member wish to speak on this item? No. Can I ask any member now to indicate now via the chat box function if they're not in agreement with the recommendations in this report? I'm going to wait 20 seconds and Michael will confirm that if anybody doesn't agree, we will need to acknowledge if they don't. So I shall wait for the 20 seconds and you must put it in the chat box if you don't agree. That is carried. We move on to item number 6, and that's the savings programme. Again, Councillor Brett, will you move the recommendations? And Councillor Carol Wardle, will you second the motion? Councillor Brett.
Formally move, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wardle.
Formally second, Mr. Mayor.
No questions or remarks have been received. And does any member again wish to speak on this item? Right, again, can I ask any members to indicate now via the chat function if they're not in agreement with the recommendations in the report, and I'll wait 20 seconds once again. Michael will confirm after the 20 seconds. Carried. Item number 7 on the agenda is the revenue budget for 2019/20 to 2021/22, and this is in with the Local Government Act 2003's requirements. Council are required to consider the report of the Chief Financial Officer, who is required under the Local Government Act of 2003 to report to the Council prior to setting the budget and the council tax. The Chief Finance Officer concludes the proposed budget is robust and the proposed levels of general balance in the reserves are adequate. The report also recommends that the general fund balances are set at 17 million. Councillor Brett, will you move the recommendations? And Councillor Wardle, will you second the motion? Councillor
Formally
Brett.
move, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wardle.
Formally second, Mr. Mayor.
And no questions or remarks have been received. Does any member wish to speak on this item? Can I again ask members to indicate now via the chat function if they're not in agreement with any of the recommendations in the report? I'll wait 20 seconds and Michael will indicate when the time is over. That is carried. Item number 8 on the agenda is the budget. Members should be aware that the vote for any decisions relating to the making of the calculation or the issuing of the precept has to be taken by a named vote. This means that the final vote on this item will be a named vote. As in this debate on the council's budget, I'll be using my discretion to extend the length of time members are able to speak. Councillor Brett, will you move the recommendations relating to the budget?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for this. It is with some sadness and regret I have to recommend that we increase the council precept by 4.99%, which in effect works out with all the everything else at 4.75. In terms of the people on the lowest council tax band, this is about 15 pence a day. And I think the average, even for those on the higher tax band of D, is only about £1 a day or even less. In moving this, as I said, I have before you, it represents a very balanced budget, which we are required to set. And despite the council facing significant cost increases and income losses through the impact of the pandemic, the council has used COVID funding from the government, which I acknowledge, but I have had to use our own resources and reserves to make sure it balances. The loss of commercial income due to travel restrictions means there are still some significant funding issues going forward. We still need to repurpose some of our reserves over the medium term to fund the expected commercial losses with a plan to replenish these over a 10-year period. To support the balanced year budget, we've increased fees and charges already by table tonight of 2%. This will contribute only 70,000. Both general and specific consultation with residents and required stakeholders have taken place as the budget has progressed, and we listened the other night and made some amendments to the cuts we were looking for. The budget has addressed significant demand-led pressures and service areas that deal with the most vulnerable in our communities, both children and adults. Funding has been identified to support our adult social care providers in paying the real living wage for staff who help protect the most vulnerable in our community. We continue to deliver our social care services in an integrated model, with us making decisions at the beginning of the pandemic, not to risk share with the CCG during 2021. We have still continued to develop our integrated services with improved outcomes for residents being in the heart. Despite the fact we're increasing it by that, including the 3% that the government has said for adult care, and I'll deal with that more when I deal with the Tory amendment. There is also our ability to collect the council tax and business rates, which remain a serious concern. The council needs more certainty over the level of funding for future years to give us the ability to plan, and we need sufficient government funding to help provide vital services. And I don't believe that council tax is a sustainable way of supporting local government. The council will continue to lobby the government to provide us with the funding necessary to support businesses, residents and council services. We were proud to launch the opening of Rochdale Riverside 1, but the impact of the pandemic on Riverside has been recognised in the budget, with the budget providing 750,000 recurrent funding to support the scheme. Due to the financial pressures we face, we haven't invited bids for capital programme and have limited new schemes to those that we can fund ourselves or support operational delivery, such as the new cremators at Rochdale. Nevertheless, the capital programme continues to provide investment to help regenerate the borough with plans to develop a Riverside 2 scheme, invest in our local heritage, Rochdale Town Hall and Town Hall Square. The programme supports work with our partners, Leap for Life, to expand the use of Hollingworth Lake with activities for families and all age groups, which should finance themselves through income generation. The programme continues to contain funding to tackle climate change, including investment in a solar farm at Chamber House. But as I said, the council tax is not fit for purpose. It's a regressive tax, which often falls on the poorest members of the communities, which I'm very sad about. Having said that, we do have a band aid where up to 85% is paid for by us, and those of present pension credit age can get up to 100%. And if there's still some people who fall outside that, there is the hard soup fund. So the headlines are less than £20 a day for a band aid property. We've suffered 184 million cuts over the last 11 years. There is still no long-term solution for healthcare and social care funding. And I note in today's budget, it was once again kicked down the road into the long grass. As I've said, the council tax funding system is very inequitable because a 1% increase in Rochdale raises one of the smallest amounts in the whole of Greater Manchester. And Greater Manchester doesn't even compare to some of the southern and southeast boroughs. I'm proud of our investment in frontline services, highways, potholes and green investment. I'm proud of the way children's service, adult care, the town hall project, the railway gateway, protect our libraries and much more. We have a proud record to be proud of. And so therefore, Mr. Mayor, I welcome you to support this, everybody to support this budget, and I will answer any questions when they come and defend it to anyone. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Brett. Councillor Wardle, will you second the recommendations? And you may reserve the right to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I support the recommendation, reserve the right to speak, and would like to also echo what Alan has said, how very sad we all are that we've had to bring an increase in. We looked long and hard at some other way to do it, but we had to produce a balanced budget at the end of the day. Thank you.
Wardle, you're negating your right to speak by carrying on now.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. We have two submitted amendments to deal with this evening, and these are set out in supplementary papers, and I intend to deal with these first. So, Councillor Durnley, would you please move your amendment?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Ollie, will you second the amendment? And again, you may reserve your right to speak.
Mr. Mayor, I second the amendment and I do reserve my right to speak at the end.
Thank you. Has any member any comments on the amendment? Councillor Faisal.
Mr. Mayor, shouldn't we be moving?
Surely, Mr. Mayor, I've got a comment, but surely I can't comment until I hear what Councillor Durnley's got to say.
I apologise for that. I'm moving along too quickly. So
sorry about that.
Can I move back? Councillor Durnley, would you move your amendment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, in moving our amendment to the budget, can I begin by thanking Julie Murphy and all the finance team for their diligence in ensuring that our finances are in good order. Thanks also to the council management and staff who have worked tirelessly throughout a difficult year to ensure that good services from bin collection to supporting those in greatest need and our schools and care homes has continued despite the pandemic. And Mr Mayor, it is also right to thank our government for all their support at these difficult times. Money to the tune of 118,490,000 so far has been provided to help business, to help the council, to help those who need it most. And just to highlight a few of those measures, over £4 million for infection control, helping those in our nursing and care homes. Over £2 million on rapid testing and test and trace, helping to deal with the pandemic. 200,000 to help reopen our high streets last summer. Over 350,000 for emergency assistance for food and essential supplies. 970,000 for the winter grant scheme. 100,000 and more to come for domestic abuse. And over 85 million to help support small businesses in the ways of grants and rate relief. And thanks, Mr Mayor, to this support, it makes it possible not to increase council tax this year. And in a similar way that we thank council staff for all their hard work, at this time we should also be providing a helping hand to all the borough residents. As we all know, council tax increases hit hardest those on low pay, the shop worker, the bus driver, the care assistant. All have worked hard, many on the front line, many at minimum wage throughout the pandemic, and should now be helped at this difficult time by not increasing the council tax. Now, we've heard a lot recently from Councillor Faisal Rana, and I'm sure he thinks he is responsible for the Chancellor mentioning Rochdale today and providing money of £23.6 million for our town's fund. Good news. Sorry, Councillor Rana, you're not on the Chancellor's radar at all, but it's thanks to the hard work of council staff, Rochdale Development Agency and our two MPs. And it's always helpful to have an MP in the same party of the government of the day, whatever that is. And we are lucky to have that with Chris Clarkson. Good news too, that the Chancellor hasn't listened to Councillor Rana on preventing councils from deciding the rate of council tax increase. But as he opposes an increase, at least he will be voting with us tonight on our proposals to stop this unnecessary rise. That is the correct way to deal with this, not to ask the government to take away the democratic right of the council to set its own budget. I am dismayed that he does not support a local vote on council tax, and I hope that is not the general view of the Labour group on council. Now, I understand some of Labour's concerns, and to try to help Labour members support our amendment, who may be concerned that we are using some of the 2,162,000 surplus to help local people, and this could be seen as irresponsible. Let me remind you, as Councillor Brett did earlier, that the Treasury team state in their report that both balances and reserves are adequate at this time, and that is without the surplus being added to the reserves. And if you are still concerned that we are being profligate, perhaps I can remind you that Sir Keir Starmer said, "This is not the time to raise tax." That means all tax, both local and national. And as he and the Labour Party in Parliament did not oppose the local government settlement, he clearly believes there is significant money to make such a statement and not to increase the council tax. Now is the time, and we have the funds for us to help local people across our borough. It is the coming year, as our Chancellor said in his brilliant budget statement today, when the hard-working and especially the lower paid will be in need of support. We can play our small part here in Rochdale by helping everyone at this time and not putting up their council tax. I therefore urge you all to support our sensible motion that at its heart has local people and not party politics. I move the amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Durnley. Councillor Ollie, will you second the amendment, please?
I second the amendment, Mr. Mayor, and as I said before, I reserve the right to speak at the end.
Thank you for that. Any member now making a comment on the amendment? I've got Councillor Rana.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll let leader have a right to speak first, Mr. Mayor, if that's okay with you.
Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, can I say how disheartened I've been with the Conservative suggestion that we should reject what would equivalent of the adult social care precept in our council budget. I've been really disappointed. We've all witnessed the failure of the Conservative government to deliver a social care white paper over the last 10 years, going back to Dilnot report in 2010. The latest paper does nothing to change my view on that. Nationally, there is no plan to fix social care or the NHS, or to address the inequalities that exist in different parts of the country. In October last year, the Health and Social Care Committee set out the impacts of adult social care funding shortfalls and called for an increase in funding of 3.9 billion by 23-24. But this has not been delivered in today's budget or in the future. Instead, the only avenue open to us is to raise funds through the council tax. Continual cuts to local authority funding, alongside the lack of a coherent care strategy, has delivered a nightmare scenario when other local authorities have had to issue Section 114 notices, the equivalent of bankruptcy, and we are not going down that road. This precept is the only way this council can afford to care for those who most need us. And this pandemic has shown that this is not the time to turn your back on those who need care and those who care for them. Thank you.
O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was a very eloquent speech, Councillor Durnley. Although I do have to take issue with your comment that Councillor Rana was not on the Chancellor's radar. Perhaps if the Chancellor had been listening to councillors in the first place, we would not be in this situation today. And that quite arrogant comment sadly typifies the Conservative approach to the current economic crisis, as well as the pandemic crisis that we are facing. As Councillor Durnley well knows, because Councillor Holly asked the question in scrutiny the other day about the budget and the reserves, one of the issues is, although you're quite right, on the current levels of funding, if they were sustained, the Conservative amendment's possible. But that's not the case, because over the next 3 years, we have not been guaranteed as a council the funding to make sure that that council tax freeze is sustainable. I wish it were. Let's take the budget today, which was the Chancellor's opportunity to basically put all councils across the country in a position where we could freeze council tax. Labour councils, Conservative councils, Lib Dem councils, and councils of many colours. We could have all frozen council tax if the Chancellor had chosen to spend £2 billion to put that funding in place. He chose not to. Now, £2 billion sounds like a lot of money, but the Chancellor has already borrowed over £320 billion to help with the COVID crisis, an approach that we in the Labour Party support, as Councillor Durnley said. So for £2 billion extra, council tax could have been frozen for every single person in the country. The Chancellor failed to do it. He failed to listen to councillors. He failed to listen to the LGA, the Conservative-led LGA, in doing that. And that's why, unfortunately, this amendment can't stand, because that long-term funding is not in place. And unfortunately, as we know from scrutiny, you know, services do have to dip into reserves to run. Look at children's care. We in scrutiny have supported dipping into children's care to look after the most vulnerable in our borough using reserves. Personally, I would love us to be able to get that extra funding, but because of the cuts, we've not been able to do that, so we have to use reserves. If you then spend the reserves on what is essentially your attempted election bribe, then unfortunately you're going to put people at risk. It's imprudent, bad for people and the most vulnerable. We can't go with it as much as we'd all love to. What you can do, Councillor Durnley, is go to the Chancellor, because even if he's not listening to Councillor Rana, I'm sure he'll listen to councillors in his own party, and tell him to stump up the 2 billion for a national council tax freeze. That's what we need. That's the solution, and that's what I suggest you do.
Councillor Rana, you started to speak earlier on, and I've taken advice that you could carry on because you did not come out with any comments. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I don't know why the Conservatives are tabling a motion tonight to freeze the council tax. They should be sending it to the government, because the 5% rise in our council tax is a government increase, not Rochdale councils. And our honourable leader of the opposition knows our grant settlement assume an increase in the council tax. I'm a big supporter of council tax freeze and spoke about it in this chamber previously, but it is impossible without government support during current pandemic to freeze council tax. The Conservative amendment tonight is financially irresponsible. It uses one-off funding from reserves. But what happens next year? If we use 1.8 million this year, there will be a black hole in the council finances next year. Many essential council services people rely on would be put in jeopardy. This is a reckless proposal. The Tory government is opposed to raising taxes nationally because this would damage the recovery. Yet, at the same time, it is telling local council to raise taxes by 5%. If the Conservatives were serious about keeping the council tax down, they would do what David Cameron did 8 years ago, Mr. Mayor, and provide local authorities with a council tax freeze grant. Rochdale was able to cancel council tax rises for 3 years. That's the only way to freeze the council tax during the current pandemic. The Conservative amendment is financially irresponsible and would lead to huge cuts in essential services in the future. I urge members to reject it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rana. Councillor Callum Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A simple comment from me. I'll keep it short. I think it's absolutely crazy that we've been having to deal with Conservative government-led austerity for over a decade now. And now the Tory group are trying to make it out as if they're some sort of champion of the working class and lowest paid in our borough. We asked the government to roll back austerity in a motion a couple of years back, and this Tory group did not support it. If they've done anything at all in the past that shared the spirit of this amendment, then fair enough, but they've not, nothing at all. It's a huge contradiction and an obvious political ploy, and I hope and expect that the public will see through it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any other comments from any members? No, then I'll move on to Councillor Brett. You have a right to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I just say that a lot of what it said, Councillor Durnley talks about what's happened. Well, when we were looking at freezing the council tax, we did some research with John Blundell and one or two others in economics, and we got the officers, and we found that by raising the council tax by this small amount, the poorest members of society benefited more than if we'd have frozen it, etc. because they often get more out of council services than the richer members. And I know that I got a long diatribe from a member of, he says he's not a member of any party, but I think he lives in Wardle, telling me he doesn't use social services, doesn't use education, so why should he pay for any of it? Okay. Now, can we just get to this financial irresponsibility here? If we don't accept this 1.9%, I accept Councillor Durnley's now going along with a 3% government tax. Then next year, there's an extra 1.8 million pressure on the budget, as Councillor Rana has pointed out. Already next year, there's 5 million shortfall. So that would put it up to 6.8 million. It would mean we would be looking at the any of the cuts that we were looking at this year and rejected would have to be brought back. Now, let me tell you what compound interest does. If we go on, all right, to don't put this up, and it's an increase we can never get back, then in 10 years' time, we will be £21 million less in our base budget by rejecting this tonight. So this is a budget not just for this year, but for future years and to protect services. I urgently urge everybody, including the Tories, to have a rethink and reject this ridiculous short-term measure.
Thank you, Councillor Brett. Councillor Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can we put all this into context? It was a very good report page within the main document on page 300, which actually shows the SIP for Financial Resilience Index, which basically is a measure. It's done by the auditors, and it's a measure of how prudent we are as a council. We're exceedingly prudent as a council. You can see that, in the graph that's been proposed there. We have actually got so many reserves at the moment that we can afford to use reserves in a modest sort of way. Now, Councillor Brett knows that I would not normally advocate using reserves for ongoing financing. I've never done it before, but I think we're in a really strange situation at the moment. And frankly, if we weren't be getting the vast sums of money from the council, from the government, we would be in a very difficult position. If we go back to about 3 or 4 months ago, when the assumptions for the budget were set, or when the council tax increases were first envisaged, at that point in time, we were looking for a shortfall on our finances. I can't remember, it was £7 or £9 million. We're projected to come in at a £2.1 million surplus. The government has given us so much money. In Over Scrutiny, Councillor Johnson actually asked the question, has the government replenished all the money that we have lost through loss of income or additional costs? And the answer was, for the current year, yes. If you look at our balances have not moved. They are at 17 million, and they're staying at 17 million. You then look at the equalisation reserve, that's not moved. We haven't used equalisation. In fact, if you look at where we are at the moment compared to where we were this time last year, the equalisation reserve then was 23 million. We actually saved another 10 million between when the budget was set and when the books of the council were signed off by the auditors. 10 million. We've got so many reserves here that it's very easy for an accountant to say, everything is prudent. It is prudent. I'm an accountant, and I obviously want to have a very prudent balance sheet. But there are times when you use reserves. I've advocated in the past that using them for the odd, if you like, one-off item. But the reserves are there, but particularly the balances are there, when there is, a real problem in the finances and you're trying to fill a gap there. And if it's not now, a time to use reserves, I don't know when it would be. So that's all we're advocating, is to use a small amount of the reserves, 1.8 million, to give hard-pressed residents in our council a bit of respite, a bit of help. And that money, of course, will actually go into business. So it helps local businesses as well. So I think we need to put all this into context. We accept the need to have an increase in the social care precept, but it's the main budget that we're saying that we want to actually use our local democratic choice and not put forward an increase. And we can actually afford it. The other thing I would like to say as well is that clearly, the accounting function here are exceedingly good. They've been, open when they come to open scrutiny. They've been really helpful in briefing me and giving me information that I want. But most importantly, they are, first rate at running our finances. And I suspect that our surplus for the current year might be even more than the £2.1 million. Professionally, they have to set a balanced budget. Professionally, they have to have, prudency in the accounts. Prudency is on a spectrum. And in my judgment, the spectrum is too prudent at this point in time when, we are in a situation that is absolutely extraordinary for the whole country. So I think that, first of all, I would hope that the Labour Party would support this motion because it is sensible to help our residents. And secondly, I really do want to thank the members of our finance team for all the hard work that they've done in the year and the professional ways they've carried out their duties. And finally, I would actually like to thank the government. Without the government's help, we would be in a complete mess, which we thought we may have been in about 9 months ago. So I commend this amendment to the council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dearnley, you now have the final right to reply.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the most important thing to get across, first of all, is Councillor Cox's point. She's completely wrong. She's either not read the budget or doesn't kind of understand it. We are not stopping the social care funding whatsoever. We're only stopping the 1.99% that is the local council tax rate, that we're still agreeing to the 3% for adult social care. So please make sure that everyone is aware of that, with no intentions of stopping the need for the adult social care. Yeah, Councillor Rourke has a point, only 2 billion, another 2 billion from the government. Well, I say to Councillor Rourke, only 1.78 million from Rochdale Council to stop this unnecessary rise at this time. You can't have it everywhere. And this business about going back to the days of David Cameron and not raising council tax, I remember the arguments at that time and the arguments that Councillor Brett's raised tonight. If you do that, you're storing up problems in the year ahead. It was always said. So that argument falls. We have got to take some responsibility for some of the decisions that we take in the way we spend and raise money. And putting it into context, as Councillor Holly rightly said, this is a small amount to help people in what is a very difficult time. And the point raised again, I think, by Councillor Rourke about this is some political gesture coming up to elections. Well, it certainly isn't, but I do wonder if that is not the intention of the controlling group, that next year when it's all out, they may not intend raising the council tax. And I hope I'm wrong, because what we need to do is look after the people now who need this help the most. And had we listened to Councillor Nolan and gone along with his idea that we didn't need austerity, this government or any government would never have been in the position to provide all the support to everyone, to business, to local communities that they've been able to do, thanks to the hard work that this Conservative government did over 10 years in reducing the debt, in sorting out the finances of this country, that we have been able to weather this terrible storm, the worst situation that anyone's been in since the World War, so successfully. With a debt of gratitude to this government for all that they've done for us. And we could now help the local people in Rochdale by not putting up the council tax by a further 1.99% and benefiting most the people on low incomes, low pay, who are working hard, striving hard, and deserve our support at this time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I hope all members will support the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Durnley. We're now going to move to the vote on the amendment. Now we'll start the roll call. Now, when I call your name, please indicate clearly if you wish to vote for, against, or abstain. Okay. Councillor Ali Ahmed. Councillor Ali Ahmed.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me? Are you voting for or against or abstaining?
Well, against the amendment. I'm voting against the amendment.
Councillor Iftikhar Ahmed.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Shakil Ahmed.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dilat Ali.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sultan Ali.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor David Bamford.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Tom Besford.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Malcolm Boris.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Alan Brett.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor
Have
Philip.
you missed, Mr. Mayor? Mr. Mayor, I think you've missed me. I'm against the amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Who've I missed?
So,
For that, Councillor Blundell.
I'm against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Philip Burke.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wendy Cox.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Patricia Dale.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Ashley Burnley.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Raymond Dutton.
Against.
Councillor Neil Emmett.
Where is it?
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Susan Emmett.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Janet Emsley.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor James Garthside.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor John Hartley.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kieran Eakin.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Michael Holly.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Aftab Hussain.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Andy Kelly.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Peter Malcolm.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Donna Martin.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rachel Massey.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Daniel Meredith.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Amna Mia.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kathleen Nixon. Councillor Kathleen Nixon.
For.
Councillor Callum Nolan.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sean O'Neill.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Liam O'Rourke.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rena Palucci.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rana.
Against,
Michael
Mr. Mayor.
Rana. Councillor Wasim Rashid.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sarah Robotham.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Peter Rush.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Susan Smith.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Angela Smith.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Patricia Sullivan.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor John Taylor.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Carol Wardle.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Jane Warne.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor June West.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Donna Williams.
Against, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Peter Williams,
Against, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Peter Winkler,
For, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Elsie Waith,
Against, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Samina Zahir,
Against, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Mohammed Zaman.
Against, Mr Mayor.
Concludes it. The amendment is lost. I'm moving on to the next amendment. Councillor Kelly, would you move your amendment? And Councillor Bamford, would you second the amendment? And Councillor Bamford, you may reserve your right to speak. Councillor Kelly?
Mr Mayor, would you like me to introduce it now? Or...
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, here we are again for Budget Fixing Council, the annual damned if we do, damned if we don't meeting. I'd like to thank firstly the finance officer who helped us quite diligently with our requests for figures and for budgets. We spent quite a bit of time researching and reporting back, and it's made a big difference to the information that we've got. But I do have to say something about that towards the end. The Lib Dem alternative budget likes to take a look at the greatest hits over the last couple of years this year, because that's exactly what it is. If we don't submit an alternative budget, we're not taking it seriously. And if we do propose an alternative budget and fail to mention it again the following year, we're accused of U-turning. So here we are. I'd like to think we're beginning to see the shoots of recovery in the country as we come out of the COVID pandemic this spring. And I really think it's worthwhile considering the below as we do that, because budgets are tight for everybody. I'm going to go through it line by line and briefly, because you've heard most of this before. I don't deny that. Union subsidies. Again, we've funded another £90,000 or thereabouts supporting a union. Now, let me repeat, I am not anti-union. I'm a union member, but I believe that union membership should pay for union activities. We shouldn't be funding through the council taxpayer unions that subsequently donate millions of pounds back to the Labour Party. It's wrong. The assistant portfolio allowances have long been a bugbear of ours. Nowhere else in the council would a group of paid staff have no accountability, no reporting system, and no job description. The comms department for the council now runs at almost £500,000 a year, yet seems to be bomb-proof when it comes to budget cuts. In fact, it's been increased. £500,000 a year for spin doctors. It's too much. And once again, I revert back to a 2016 decision where councillors voted to pay themselves a pay rise. It was wrong back then during austerity, and we're still in austerity now, and it's still wrong. The Conservatives and Rochdale Council supported the Labour amendment on the basis that they would review this at the first available opportunity. Well, that moment's past, I'm afraid. That happened in 2020 when we did the boundary review. The boundary review took place, and it gave the Conservatives plenty of opportunity to fulfil the promise, and they didn't take it. They didn't review it. They worked with Labour on submitting the proposals. And I'd like to know a bit more detail about that discussion, but the Lib Dems were barred from taking part. In fact, we submitted our own proposals for restructure, which involved a 10% cut in councillors as a whole. Councillors' allowances over the last 4 years have totalled, and this is just the increase, £700,000. I heard Councillor Brett earlier mention that we're saving £750,000 a year in mitigation against the shopping centre. It's the same amount almost. Council's allowances will top £1 million this year in Rochdale, and it's the same year that a council band D tax will top £2,000 a year. So before I'm accused of tinkering around the edges of the budget again, I want to tell you what happened in that process with that I did with the finance officer. We were considering the bigger ticket items and considering what the council's commitments are going forward. And I asked the officer for details around the repayment for Riverside One Shopping Centre. It's a 35-year repayment, and it's not a loan, that's just the rent. We're already saving £250,000 in case things go wrong. And I've been informed that over the 35 years, we're the main tenant and we're responsible for all the rent and business rates, regardless of whether it's rented or not. We get to keep that rent, But in the light of the pandemic and the light of the fact that the high street shopping is not looking good, I've got to say that we're going to be using more and more of our prudential savings, if not our reserves, just to keep the payments up on that shopping centre. How much is the rent and how much are we putting aside? Well, I'm not allowed to be told, apparently, because it's commercially sensitive. I'm not allowed to understand or prepare a budget because it's commercial. And if I can't do it as an elected member, how are the general public expected to understand the figures and justify any rises in council tax? Mr. Mayor, we're all aware that there's been a very loud lobbying from certain quarters to review chief exec and chief exec pay rises and executive pay. This is not the place to do that. The place to do that is at scrutiny committees and at cabinet. But it's very hard to answer members of the public when all of the facts are not available to us, even as elected members. Concerned, but I submit this alternative budget to council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Councillor Bamford, will you second the motion? Second the amendment?
I formally second the amendment,
Your
Mr.
right
Mayor.
to speak.
I formally second the amendment, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, did you get that?
I didn't, no. Say again.
Sorry, I formally second the amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Do you wish to speak or do you wish to reserve your right to speak?
I reserve my right to speak, please, Mr. Mayor.
Right. Councillor Sean O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I just want to actually clear things up here because it comes up every year, this one, where it says removal of the union subsidy, and it was described by Councillor Kelly that taxpayers' money funds the union. I'm sorry, but you've got it completely wrong. It is misleading. That money, £87.6 thousand, is the wages of those employees. They are employees who are being elected by the trade union members of the council to take up those duties. Those duties are what they call facilities time. That's what they're entitled to. And they're entitled to that under the Trade Unions and Labour Relations Act 1992. And believe it or not, it was brought in by a Conservative government. It's administered through the ACAS Code of Practice. It's cheaper to have full-time officials on leave, basically. But they've got to have been an employee of this organisation. They're not from outside, as is inferred by Councillor Kelly. So I mean, this is again a very, very poor recommendation. And you look at the workforce, how they've stepped up to the plate in this recent pandemic. You're attacking them. It's absolutely a disgrace. You haven't done any research. You've just plucked it out the sky, and here it is again. I've been on the council 9 years, and it's been on every 9 years. We've had the explanation after explanation what it is, but people still keep coming back to attack it. I wonder why. Your alternative, really, your alternative is to bin this and all the rest of the proposals. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor O'Neill. Councillor O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to do Nick Statham, who I know is watching this, a favour and tell him he can just copy and paste what I said last year, because it is just that. It's a tired amendment from the Lib Dems, because as we have proven, as has been proven by academics, not by the Labour Party, but by academics, for every £1 spent on union facility time, £2.31, and that is not taken into account inflation, that was £2.31 in 2016, so it'll be vastly more now, is saved by the council. And let's have a look how that's worked out during this pandemic. You know, we've been able to communicate with workers far more effectively as a council while they have busted a gut, you know, looking after people during this pandemic, you know, and the unions have helped us do that. And what does Councillor Kelly say and the Lib Dems? We didn't need them anyway. It's bad economics, it's bad populism, and quite frankly, you need to think again on this one, because it is something that clearly benefits the council, our workers and our residents. And just to point out, that money does not go to the Labour Party. You know, if the unions have political funds which workers choose to donate to, and actually to suggest that the council is in some sort of roundabout strategy with the unions is slanderous and really should be withdrawn, as I believe a previous leader of the Lib Dems had to do when Councillor Lambert was leader of the Labour Party locally, because actually it's a slanderous comment, and you got taken to task on it then. What's even more disappointing about this, thank you, Councillor O'Neill. What's even more disappointing about this, though, this budget, is you talk about the work councillors do and allowances. Perhaps the Lib Dems should be paying back their allowances, because we've had 2 scrutiny meetings on the budget. The Lib Dems failed to turn up to either of them. So whilst Labour councillors and Conservative councillors were discussing the budget in public meetings, the Lib Dems failed to turn up, to send a substitute, and failed to do their job. It's not good enough for residents, and quite frankly, we could have had these discussions in scrutiny, got it sorted then and there, but instead you bombed out the meeting, didn't turn up, and just brought the tired old arguments here. It's really disappointing. Furthermore, you would know, if the Lib Dems would know if you'd have attended or actually paid attention to these meetings, that when it comes to executive pay, I actually proposed that we bring it as an item to scrutiny, and that a report is being done so that we can scrutinise executive pay. But because you failed to turn up and do your jobs, you don't know that. So you've come to this meeting with a grand speech based on something you didn't even bother to find out about. It's not good enough. Your amendment's not good enough. Think about how you do the job and turn up to the meetings. Don't moan about being cut out if you don't turn up. Not good enough. F.
Thank you, Councillor O'Rourke. Councillor Durnley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a lot of sympathy with much of what Councillor Kelly said, but there are a couple of issues that are the reasons why tonight we will abstain as a group. I think first of all on communications, that's really important at this particular time. We've got all the issues around coronavirus, the need to ensure that as many people as possible get vaccinated, with issues around adoption and all those services. And I think that team can actually make a significant difference in helping to get us out of the pandemic and the problems that we're facing. I do, however, believe that they're not there to represent the Labour Party. They are there to represent the council as a whole. And we've made the point time and again, and indeed there's been support from the leadership, that this should involve certainly the opposition party for a comment at time. And generally that fails to happen. It sometimes happens if something's difficult, where they need my support, and then it happens. And there are other issues when they do. But I think that needs to be borne in mind, or else we may be in favour of supporting a reduction in future. But we really do need to ensure that there's a comment allowed from an opposition member that quite often is not going to be negative. It's quite often going to be supportive and positive of the council and its actions. But even if it's negative, we should all be big enough and certain enough of our position to be able to accept that. That is democracy. They're not there to serve the Labour Party. They're there to serve the council as a whole. and we must make sure that happens. So for now, I don't think at this particular time it's the right thing to decide to reduce that particular service. Needs to be looked at again in 12 months' time, and I hope those comments that I've made tonight are taken on board, and then I think it will be moving in the right direction. Regarding members' allowances, most of the Conservative members actually didn't really get an increase at all, because at that time the shadow portfolio holders lost their allowance. So even though there was a general increase in the basic members' allowance, that in most of our cases meant no real increase. But there is a time to deal with that. Further on the agenda tonight, we're setting up a meeting of the remuneration panel that is going to be looking at members' allowances. And those allowances, as happened last time, can both go up and go down. And in our cases, they went down by removing those shadow portfolio holder places. So that to me is now the time to deal with that. We can't go back to 16, 17, whenever, but that will be an opportunity to deal with that, to put forward our views and concerns and comments, and we'll see what the remuneration panel come up with in due course. So yes, there's a lot on which I agree with Councillor Kelly, but I think at this time, some things are a cause of concern and a need to continue, and so therefore we will be abstaining. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Durnley. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to comment on the member allowances. As we've heard, a decision was taken in 2016. It's now 2021. And certainly from my perspective, whatever decision was taken in 2016, I played absolutely no part in it. The same goes for many other elected members, and most others beyond that have been re-elected since that date. I personally think I give good value for money for what my constituents. I put myself forward because I wanted to make a difference to the community. I didn't do it for remuneration. I suspect most of the councillors feel exactly the same. But if any councillor doesn't feel they give value for money, they're able to take action and pay back in part or in whole their allowances. I do think, well, I was harangued before being elected by 2 or 3 people online on this very point. And in my mind, it plays no part now, and it undermines the good points in the budget you put forward, and really it prevents us discussing those in the way we might have, because it's a distraction, and I don't think it's got any place in 2021, particularly when the remuneration panel will be reviewing this in a short time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Taylor. Councillor Meredith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's not usually that I say that I agree with the Conservatives and completely disagree with the Liberal Democrats, because my comment was going to be on the comms team, which I think Ashley has already put very eloquently across. I just want to personally thank them for the work that they did do in Cacol, obviously promoting sort of the work that we were doing during the pandemic, and actually the partnership work that was actually going on at that time with RBH's comm team as well. I just want to just put down on record that massive thanks for what they've done, obviously in communities where it has been hard to actually do that outreach work due to lockdowns and the pandemic itself. I do agree with what Councillor O'Rourke has said. I do think it's completely slanderous, and I hope the Mayor does give Councillor Kelly an opportunity to withdraw them comments about what he said about the money that's being paid is going to the Labour Party. It's completely slanderous, and it's not going on. It's actually accusing the council of fraud, and that's just completely disgusting, really. So he does need to withdraw them as soon as possible, especially for the press tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Meredith. Councillor Blundell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted, I wasn't going to speak tonight because it's gone on at length, but I wanted to pick up on what Councillor Meredith had just said about Councillor Kelly's comments about how the funds for the trade unions somehow find its way back to the Labour Party. I'm sure the Assistant Director for Legal is sat with you, and that is an utterly slanderous comment that the Labour group of the the controlling group of the council, the Labour Party, is somehow funding a third body that would then give us that cash, or there is some type of sweetheart deal. I hope Councillor Kelly withdraws those comments. Another member in the past has made similar comments and said in private that he understands the issue, and that it was left there. Councillor Kelly was, as far as I'm aware, at that meeting and has made similar comments. He knows the severity of what he said and should be given the option to withdraw them.
Councillor Brett, you have a right to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to comment on the trade unions. It's all been put before, and I think the facts were given. So there. As for comms, I think I really am disgusted by this one. And can I just say to Councillor Durnley, I'm a bit surprised at him. When I speak, you'll notice if it's coming from the council, I don't speak as leader of the Labour group. I speak as leader of the council. And yes, and I don't know how Janet Emsley gets in the press so often. And then, like you, I get a bit jealous. But having said that, I think it's because she does her own and because she's a lot of sense to say. So I that. But the main role of the comms in the last 10, 11 months, and I want to thank now all IBAME councillors, various other councillors, who have done numerous, Samina Zahir, Sultan Ali, Dalat Ali, Iftikhar, Ali Ahmed, all of them, and others, I'm sorry if I missed one or two out, who've done more videos in their languages to try and get the BAME community to come along, either to be tested or in the latest case, to be inoculated. And can I say, all their work has paid off, certainly at Waterworth the other week, magnificent turnout, certainly at Castlemere and Deeplish, and I do thank them for that. And that's what comms have been doing. Now, Councillor Kelly, we know you don't go to many meetings, and we know that you don't take part in a lot of things. You're the one councillor I very seldom get an email off. Okay, but you don't seem to understand what assistant portfolios do. So I'll tell you what I'll do. When we have the next leaders meeting, if you want to turn up at that, because you're not very good at attending that neither, then I will explain to you what people like Pat Dale do, what people like Ali Ahmed do, what all the others do, John Hartley, etc. John Hartley, who has a full-time job like yourself and works shifts, okay? John Hartley very seldom fails to turn up at meetings. And so I say to you, stop, just because you don't do any work, don't think that the assistant portfolios do. Why you're picking on them, I've no idea. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this amendment is risible and shouldn't even be considered. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I asked him to withdraw it.
Thank you, Councillor Brett. And Councillor Bamford, you haven't exercised your right to speak. You can do now.
Nothing to say, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Kelly, you have the right to reply. And would you like, I've taken legal advice on this, Councillor Kelly, would you like the opportunity to clarify or withdraw any comments you have made during your speech on the amendment?
Mr. Mayor, unless I missed, well, what I said was that we should not be paying for a union that donates millions of pounds back to the Labour Party. That's what I've said.
You wish to withdraw that remark?
No, because prior to that, what I said was I believed that the activities of a union should be paid for by its membership. And I don't believe that's slanderous. In fact, Mr. Mayor, what I do believe is slanderous is when Councillor Brett accuses me of, you don't do any work. So which one is it? am I doing work or am I not doing work? Am I actively trying to formulate an alternative budget or am I not? What I would like to come back to is a couple of points that people have made so far today. First of all, if Councillor O'Rourke, the value of every pound spent on a union is more than double, why are we not increasing that in this year's budget? That would be my question to you. I think that I find it a little bit upsetting sometimes, Councillor O'Rourke, when last council meeting we listened to your account of some difficulties with mental health and you had to take time off. And that's your private business and I respect that. But you made accusations tonight about people turning up where you fully do not know or understand the situation. And I find it very, very hypocritical of you to say things like that because you've no idea what other people's lives and health are. So in terms of the members' allowances, Councillor Durnley, I'll look forward to the proposals and I'll also look forward to being invited to that meeting. I'm not entirely sure whether Lib Dems have been banned from that one as well. And the simple point about the comms budget is, yeah, it's an important function, but it's not bulletproof and it's not cut proof either. And I noticed that everybody's comments, nobody has mentioned the lack of information that is coming forward to elected members about large budget ticket items such as Riverside 1. How are we supposed to debate any of these smaller figures when the big numbers are being held from us as elected members? I move the amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. We're now going to move on to vote on the Liberal Democrats amendment. And I will start the roll call. And again, could you please very clearly explain whether you express if you want to vote for, against or abstain. Councillor Ali Ahmed.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Iftikhar Ahmed.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Shakil Ahmed.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Delatale.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Was disclosed at a meeting by a government official
Against,
to his
Mr. Mayor.
staff. Allegations also raised by the committee today.
So can I ask who authorised the senior member of your team
Councillor
to
David
reveal that
Bamford,
name?
someone is not
One of the
muted.
complainants to Jeff Hamilton. Was it you?
For
Was
Mr.
it the
Mayor.
President Secretary, or were they freelancing?
Councillor Tom Besford.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor John Blundell.
I'm against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Malcolm Boris.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Alan Brett.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Philip Burke.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wendy Cox.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Patricia Dale.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Ashley Durnley.
Mayor.
Abstain.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Raymond Dutton.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Neil Emmett.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Susan Emmett.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Janet Emsley.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor James Gardside.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor John Artley.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kieran Eakin.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Michael Holly.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Aftab Hussain.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Andy Kelly.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Peter Malcolm.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Donna Martin.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rachel Massey.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Daniel Meredith.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Amna Mia.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kathleen Nixon.
Abstain.
Councillor Callum Nolan.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Sean O'Neill.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Liam O'Rourke.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rana.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Marina Palucci, sorry.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Palucci.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Faisal Rana.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Asim Rashid.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sarah Rowbotham.
Against, Mr Mayor.
Peter Rush.
Against, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Susan Smith.
Against, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Angela Smith.
Abstain, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Patricia Sullivan.
Abstain, Mr Mayor.
Councillor John Taylor.
Abstain, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Carol Warble.
Against, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Jane Warne.
Abstain, Mr Mayor.
Councillor June West.
Against, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Donna Williams.
Against, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Peter Williams.
Against, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Peter Winkler.
Abstain, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Elsie With.
Against, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Samina Zahir.
Against, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Mohammed Zaman.
Against, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. The motion is lost. Returning to the original motion, I've had a number of questions submitted in writing, so I'll take those first, and then we will open up to debate. Councillor Sullivan, your question regarding high value homes, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Take it as read, please.
Taken as read. Thank you. Councillor Brett, could you please respond?
There is no specific target to deliver 1,000 high value homes. Rather, we're looking to deliver a wide range of housing opportunities across all the townships. And one of the anomalies of the council tax system is because we have so few H-band houses, then we don't raise the same amount as those boroughs that have lots of them. The Economy Director has been seeking to deliver sites or seek planning permissions for around 50 new high value homes per year, which includes looking at opportunities that might exist through the disposal of council-owned sites or of obviously sites owned by the general public. Sites considered on a case-by-case basis as and when land received by the council or private owners comes in, will then be proposed and they would go through the normal planning process. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Brett. Councillor Sullivan, do you have a supplementary?
No, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Brett.
Councillor Smith, your question, please, regarding the township funds.
Take as read, please, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brett, could you please respond?
The answer I've got is very simple. Once highways related schemes are approved from township budgets, the budget is transferred to highways to enable the scheme to be delivered.
Thank you, Councillor Brett. Councillor Smith, do you have a supplementary question?
No, thank you, Councillor Brett.
Councillor Palucci, your question, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Take it as read, please.
Thank you. Councillor Brett, could you respond?
Yeah, the ground floor of number 1 Riverside is currently being used by Rochdale Health Alliance as a vaccination centre. And if you've been there recently, you'll notice that it's been reconfigured because I understand next week there'll both be dose ones still given and the second dose given to the people. The clinic has recently been expanded, as I said, because of that. There remains a customer service present at the front entrance to provide ad hoc advice to members of the people who are present. The library will remain closed for as long as it's operational. The main access and egress from the building for staff, elected members and contractors will be the 2 side doors, which I think everybody knows, onto Milton Street. Going forward, we're looking at improving the main front revolving doors at Riverside 1 to meet the needs of the building. Current design has been proved problematic at busy periods, and that, I hope, answers the question.
Councillor Palucci, do you have a supplementary question?
No, I'm happy with that answer. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Brett.
Councillor Hartley, could you please put your question?
Take it as read, please, Mr Mayor. I have no supplementary.
Thank you. Councillor Brett, could you please?
Yes, can I thank Councillor Hartley for this? In addition to the annual local transport plan LTB budget received from the Department of Transport, which is about 2 million, Rochdale have received the following additional investments over the years. 2018-19, 1 million, pothole action used on large. 2021, 2.2 million, additional funding used for additional resurfacing. In addition to the amounts, Rochdale Council has invested a further nearly 15 million, a policy that I as leader and the Labour group are proud to have delivered and end, with an additional 2 million being invested in 21-22 and 1.3 million in 22-23. This funding has been used for a mixture of footway resurfacing, structural patching and preventive highways maintenance. To the local transport fund that's been discussed before for this year, we were expecting to get, well, we did get in 2021 1.9, this year 1.3, so down 611,000. Potholes and challenge fund, last year 1.7, this year 1.3, down 408. So instead of getting an increase that the government's been going on about, saying that all this pothole money, that you need money and there's a shortage, we're actually over £1 million down, which equates to 27% of GM funding. All right. So I've got to say to you, I am a bit disappointed. The government's made some great announcements today and I have welcomed them. And I will be making a statement to that effect. And I will be calling on the two MPs, Chris Clarkson especially, to join me, because I understand the Towns Fund, we have applied for 25 million and have been promised 23.6. Don't ask me why, 1.4. And just to show you how the government works, it told Ashley Durnley before it told the council. But that's, I digress, Mr. Mayor. I hope that answers everybody on the township, on the highway. So I'm proud of what we've done, but a little disappointed for the coming year. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Brett. Councillor Hartley, do you have a supplementary question?
No, I said that at the beginning, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hartley. I'll now open to the debate on the original budget motion. Now, can I remind members that with the exception of the mover and the seconder, they're only able to speak once on the motion. The mover and the seconder always have the final right of reply. Now, are there any members on the original motion? Councillor Peter Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Today, much like ourselves, the government has set out its budget. The Chancellor spoke at great length about the impact that coronavirus pandemic had on the nation. He acknowledged that people have been affected by the virus across all walks of life and that many, many businesses have been severely affected. In acknowledging this, he set out not millions, but billions of pounds of support for workers and families and businesses. A £5 billion restart grant scheme, extension of the furlough scheme until September, extension of the self-employment grants until September, £126 million for traineeships, frozen duty on alcohol, frozen duty on fuel, £300 million more for arts and culture recovery, VAT reductions, a 3-month extension on stamp duty cuts, an extension of the business rates holiday until the end of June. We've had a new recovery loan scheme, a mortgage guarantee scheme, and £520 million to help businesses grow. It is with that raft of unprecedented measures that this Conservative government continues to support people at this great, great time of need. It's therefore disappointing that this Labour group can't see the need for that unprecedented measure and are this evening seeking to raise the council precept to the maximum allowable without a referendum, putting what the Conservative group's alternative...
Just interrupt. Could you keep to the point of the budget, please? You're just going off a tangent. I apologise for stopping you, but you're going on the wrong direction. Could you just please...
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'm speaking about the budget here.
No, you're not.
Please do not interrupt. Carry on, Councillor Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So it's therefore disappointing that the Labour group cannot see the need from those unprecedented measures and are this evening seeking to raise the council precept to the maximum allowable without referendum, putting what the Conservative group's alternative budget has already shown to be unnecessary pressure on local households. The Conservative group have presented a legal and balanced budget, which allows for the 2% element of the increase to be frozen. People in this borough really need that support right now, and the Labour group have snubbed it tonight. The leader and Councillor Wardle have said how sorry they are that they're planning to raise council tax to the maximum level, and yet tonight they've refused to support is both legal and balanced. Councillor Rana has said that he can't understand the finances of the budget. He spoke about a £1.8 million cost this year in reducing that 2%, fear-mongering about a black hole. But we've already established that this year we have a surplus of over 2 million. So his argument doesn't make sense, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Brett seriously told the poorest in the borough tonight that they'd be better off with a council tax rise. And to that, I'm quite astounded. Mr. Mayor, it's a shame that the Labour group are ready to push ahead with a full council tax rise. And for the people of Rochdale and Haywood and Middleton and the Pennines, I've got to abstain on this budget. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Winkler. Are there any other members wish to make a comment? Councillor Wardle. Apologise. At the last minute, Councillor O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A very eloquent speech, Councillor Winkler. You correctly identified a long list of things the Chancellor introduced in his budget today, which makes the fact that the Conservative government chose not to spend £2 billion extra on a national council tax freeze, saving Labour councils, Conservative councils, Liberal Democrat councils and councils of coalitions of whatever, that, you know, we are in a position unlike no other. It says it all that the Chancellor chose to not freeze the one tax that other parties would be delivering. It says it all. You know, the Conservative Party could have spent that 2 billion. They chose not to. And unlike the council, which has to present a balanced budget, the government can take advantage of cheap gilts that are available at the moment on the bonds market and help us out. They chose not to do that. This council does not have that luxury. They do. They chose not to. They have failed us, they have failed workers, and they have failed residents. And to actually come out and say after all of that, oh, well, I'm going to abstain. I mean,
Councillor O'Rourke, can I interrupt you?
There is a, of course, I'll
our budget, what we're discussing tonight, please.
I will finish there, but all to say is there's something about doing something on a pot or getting off. I would suggest that the Conservative group do that and either vote for or against and make a decision.
Thank you, Councillor O'Rourke. Councillor Rowbottom.
Yeah, can I apologise again, Mr. Mayor, because my camera isn't working. I just want to support the leader in the research that was undertaken by the Public Health Department around whether or not the council tax should be increased and whether our residents would benefit. I'm more than happy to send that extensive piece of work over to Councillor Winkler, because actually what he demonstrated was that the money coming in will provide support for the services that we provide. The increase in domestic violence, for example, the increase in mental health, the increase in support that we've had to provide for our residents will unfortunately or fortunately benefit more by increasing the council tax. And that was a significant piece of work undertaken by the scientists in the Public Health Department. And as a party, we pay attention to scientists, unlike some of the Conservative members who haven't paid attention to scientists throughout the past 12 months. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rowbottom. Are there any other members wish to speak? No, then I will ask Carol Wardle. Inform Councillor Durnley wishes to speak.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just a couple of brief things. One, to put the record straight. The information regarding the town centre funds came from Robert Jenrick and not Chris Clarkson, just for information. And this actually tonight is probably the first time that as a group we will have abstained on a budget. We always generally support the budget. But the reason for abstaining tonight is because we feel so strongly at a time when so much money has been made available, we've got the chance to stop that increase and you're not doing it. But we will not vote against because there are so many things in the budget, obviously, that we fully support. So we wouldn't want to be voting against that. But we do feel that on this one occasion, and probably the first time ever in all the time I've been involved, we cannot support taxing people further at this particular time. And Councillor Rowbotham, regarding scientists, yes, we listen to scientists, and yes, we take a balanced view, because tell me two scientists that will say the same thing. So we may not agree with the scientist that you are referring to, but we will be agreeing with another one. They have mixed views on things. I didn't know if you was aware of that, but that is the reality. And we, as a government, listen to scientists, listen to businesses, listen to industry, listen to local councils. We've been involved in consultation processes on everything. And then the government takes a balanced view. And in my opinion, generally, the government gets that balanced view right. And tonight, you're failing the people by not supporting our amendment to not put up that unnecessary part of council tax that you could avoid at this time. So that is why we will be abstaining. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Durnley. Councillor Wardle, you have a right to reply. Can I?
I think someone's muted her, Mr. Mayor, and unfortunately on the phone it's very difficult to unmute yourself. She'll probably have to go out of the meeting and come back in to respond.
Sorry about that, Mr. Mayor. They keep muting me, and when they mute you on the phone, it's very, very difficult to get back into the meeting. I didn't wish to say anything else. I think it's been eloquently said by my colleagues, and I move the report and second it.
Correct. You have the final right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't wish to prolong it. I thank Peter Winkler for his comments as the PR for the local MP and the government. I'm a bit disappointed in Councillor Durnley. He's had it explained to him, and probably in private he'll agree with me and he'll understand. I'm a bit surprised that Councillor Mike Holly, an accountant, not realising that how much money we'd lose over the 10 years if we didn't put it up. But there again, it's not about being logical tonight, it's trying to grab headlines. So, Mr. Mayor, I recommend this Labour budget, as it now seems to have become, but I recommend the Council's budget to everybody. I would like to ask if there's any people with a bit more backbone in the Conservative Party to support us in this. Mr. Mayor, I so move.
Thank you, Councillor Brett. We're now going to move to the vote. Now, I must remind members that, again, this is a name vote. And when asked, please, could you indicate whether you are for the motion, against the motion, or whether you wish to abstain from the motion, on the motion. Now, members, remember, we are voting on the original motion now. I'm going to start the roll call, and when I call your name, please indicate how you wish to vote. Councillor Ali Ahmed.
Mr. Mayor, for.
Councillor Iftikhar Ahmed.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Shakil Ahmed.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Delat Ali.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sultan Ali.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Brian Bamford. David Bamford, sorry.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor John Blundell.
For Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, I think you've
Councillor Boris.
Mr.
For
Mayor.
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Alan Brett.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Philip Burke.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wendy Cox.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Patricia Dale.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Ashley Durnley.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Raymond Dutton.
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Neil Emmett.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Susan Emmett.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Janet Emsley.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor James Garside.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor John Arkley.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kieran Eakin.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Michael Holly.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Aftab Hussain.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Andy Kelly.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Peter Malcolm.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Donna Martin.
Support Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rachel Massey.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Daniel Meredith.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Amna Mia.
For Mr. Mayor.
Kathleen Nixon.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Callum Nolan.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sean O'Neill.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Liam O'Rourke.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Faisal Rana.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Asim Rashid.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sarah Robotham.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Peter Rush.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Susan Smith.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Angela Smith.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Patricia Sullivan.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor John Taylor.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Carol Wardle.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Jane Warne.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Can I have a vote, please?
I'll go back. Can I just finish and I'll come back? I apologise for that. Councillor June West.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Donna Williams.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Peter Williams.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Peter Winkler.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Elsie Wade.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Samin Zaire.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Mohammed Zaman.
For Mr. Mayor.
Who have I missed?
Me.
Rena.
Apologise for this.
You've missed me, Mr. Mayor. Rena.
Councillor Rena Palucci.
Yes, that's me. Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, Rena.
No problem.
Anybody else?
Tom Besford.
Tom Besford.
For Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. The motion is carried. I apologise for that. It's difficult doing a roll call and where people have abstained or changed their or not here. So please, I apologise for my. I should have been a school teacher calling the register in the morning, shouldn't I? We're now moving on to item number 9. That's the appointment of the remuneration panel. The council is asked to approve the appointment of an independent remuneration panel to fulfil the statutory requirements. Councillor Brett, would you please move the report?
I have great pleasure in moving this and give an undertaking to Councillor Kelly that I'll ask the remuneration panel to personally interview him and hopefully he'll fill in any forms that they ask. For those who were around last time, we all had to fill in worksheets, etc. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I formally move it.
Councillor Wardle, will you second it?
Formally second, Mr. Mayor.
Does any member wish to comment on it? Can I ask the members to indicate now via the chat function if they're not in agreement with this recommendation on the report, And again, I will wait 20 seconds for Michael to confirm if anyone doesn't agree. You must acknowledge if you don't agree. That is carried. That concludes the business for this evening. Now I declare the meeting closed, and thank you everyone for attending and for a very informative meeting.